expert in online collaboration and action also. I was just wondering, is it possible to give an impression how many people worldwide are involved in these kinds of activities?
Well, so the first answer is 1.4 billion, roughly, because every time we poll internet users and we ask them in any forum, right, what is it you actually do on the internet? Some form of social participation is always at the top of the list. Right? Now, it may just be sharing pictures of the grandkids, right? No great world-changing goals, but it's still more participation than you see with people sitting in front of their television, right? So everyone who's on the internet is engaged in some participatory forum, even with only a small group of friends or family. So essentially, the biggest number is however many people are online right at the moment. As you narrow the question down, when you want to ask how many people have shared a photo, how many people have contributed to Wikipedia, how many people have contributed a comment, you can find any order of magnitude you like in there, right? The audience for Twitter right now is in the, I think, the hundreds of thousands, maybe the low millions. Flickr, I think, has crossed 10 million, although they have 3 billion photographs from that very active group. The number of people who've commented on something in public is 100 million. And so there's an inverse correlation between how public the action is and how many people participate. So everyone participates in their sphere of friends, and then the more kind of public and declarative the action becomes, the more you see a core of people who are really actively thinking of themselves as producers of media.
Are there any limits, I mean activities which are maybe by their very nature are not very suited to be handled in spontaneous online collaboration?
Sure, you don't want brain surgery with spontaneous online ones. No, absolutely. This is not a case where all of the old systems are going to be thrown away and all of the new systems are going to replace them. We're not moving from A to B. We're moving from one to many. So what's really happening is, it used to be that any large-scale group that wanted to take action together had to be a managed group. And so now we're increasing the dynamic range, where there are unmanaged groups as well. And the big experiment that we don't yet have an answer to is, where do unmanaged groups work best, or groups outside of sort of traditional hierarchical management? Where do they work best and where do they work least? There are, famously the fight right now between, organized armies and guerrilla groups, right? This material has obviously helped the guerrilla end of that spectrum more. The organized armies are catching up. And I think we're going to see that kind of hybridization. It's not going to be a simple replacement. So for businesses, the question is not do we keep a hierarchy, do we adopt these sort of network tools, but rather where do we keep hierarchy and where do we start playing with these network tools? Because it's not one size fits all, it's really about form-fitting the answer to the question.
People often talk about smart mobs, but one could also imagine that there could be evil mobs, maybe smart as well, but not as we like them.
No, Howard says that in Howard Rheingold, who wrote Smart Mob, says that in the book. He said, just because it's a smart mob doesn't necessarily mean it's a good mob. And this is really one of the big changes, is society's losing the ability to say which kind of groups form and which kind of groups don't. Right? It's easier to find someone to drink beer with than to find someone to shoot up with, because if you sell beer, you can buy a big neon sign, and if you sell heroin, you can't. Right? So in the real world, society has a lot of control over groups' abilities to advertise themselves and form. Online, no. And so we're getting more of these kinds of groups that we used to be able to keep from happening. And one of the big changes in society is we're going from preventing groups that we don't think should form to having to react to them after they form. And that's I think a big change in law enforcement and ideas of social justice. It's just having lost the ability to manage group forming in some sort of social bargain, we're suddenly going to be reacting to groups much more.
So we're talking also about political philosophy again.
Yes.
How to manage large-scale online communities. Maybe we need some guardians to protect those groups, to enable them to function. But who will guard the guardians?
The guardians?
The old question
right.
again.
the most famous question in political science. The answer right now, the consensus answer seems to be that the guardians themselves have to be put into a situation where there are enough of them that they are policing one another, and through some engagement of what Steve Mann has called surveillance, the opposite of surveillance, the people being managed, observing from underneath. It's an experiment in much more radical transparency. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. You can see it, probably the most work in that domain is going on in Wikipedia, where there's the greatest incentive both to have the service be good and to destroy it on the part of the people who don't like it. And the pitched battle between the people who want to destroy Wikipedia, the people who want to defend it, and then the people who worry about the defenders, it's where people are figuring that out. And the answer seems to be, have defenders whose activities are transparent enough that you can figure out when they've become the bad actor themselves.
We are in the midst of a major financial crisis.
Yes, we are.
And we are talking here about companies such as Twitter or Flickr and Facebook, and it's not always obvious what the business models are of those companies. Do we have to fear for Web 2.0 and the communities in the midst of this crisis?
No, I don't think so. I mean, one of the interesting things about Web 2.0 is that the companies that have formed under that rubric have formed with very, very little capital. In fact, the really dramatic change between founding a company in the late 90s and founding a company in the early part of this decade is that in the late 90s you needed millions of dollars just to get the infrastructure, just servers and wires. I mean, the capital requirements were quite intense, and now they are not. And so, of all of the damage the current financial crisis is going to do, which could be horrific, I think the last thing we should be worrying about is Web 2 companies. They're cheap enough to be fine.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, very good. Sure.